It's rather interesting, I think, about our society that we are very suspicious of those very things that are supposed to bring happiness, and that conflict exists.
By the time Hugh Hefner died in 2017, the world thought it knew his story. Silk robes, star-studded parties, and a mansion that came to define an era. But beneath the marble floors and Hollywood glitz, there was another layer to the empire, one that very few people ever saw. Hidden in the basement of the Playboy mansion were vaults, secret rooms, and miles of tape reels that told a story far darker than any centerfold could capture. Former girlfriends whispered of cameras tucked behind mirrors, of women recorded without consent, of pills passed around like candy at parties that never seemed to end. Lawsuits years later would accuse Hefner not of indulgence, but of manipulation, of using the basement as both playground and prison. This wasn't just about sex or even power. It was about control. The control of women, of celebrities, even of politicians who feared what tapes might one day surface. The basement wasn't just a room beneath the mansion. It was the hidden foundation of Hefner's empire. And as those walls eventually cracked open, what spilled out wasn't glamour. It was a history of secrets, surveillance, and scars that Hollywood is still trying to reckon with. Hugh Marston Hefner was born on April 9, 1926, in Chicago, into a house where warmth was rationed like sugar during wartime. His parents were strict Methodists who thought hugs weakened character and laughter was a frivolous sin. No movies, no casual affection, no indulgence of any kind. The Hefner household was a training ground in repression. And for young Hugh, that repression became fuel. While other children were playing stickball in the streets, Hugh was sketching half-dressed women in secret notebooks. It wasn't rebellion in the loud sense. No slamming doors, no teenage tantrums. It was a quiet defiance, the kind that hid behind bedroom doors and grew sharper with every rule laid down by his parents. He later said that the absence of affection in his family didn't just shape him, it drove him, creating a craving for freedom that he would spend the rest of his life chasing. By the time he reached elementary school, Hefner had already created his own escape hatch. He wrote comic strips where he was the hero, bold, adventurous, and completely unlike the shy boy in real life. At 16, a girl named Betty broke his heart, and instead of drowning in teenage misery, Hefner reinvented himself. He shortened his name to Hef, polished his style, and poured his feelings into a comic series called School Days. For the first time, his imagination wasn't just a coping mechanism, it was a weapon. Every heartbreak, every rejection, every rule at home was reshaped into art. The boy who wasn't allowed to dream was now sketching a fantasy world that would one day spill out of the margins of his notebooks and into the pages of a magazine that shocked the world. In June of 1944, with the world still at war, Hefner traded his notebooks for a uniform. At 18, he joined the U.S. Army and trained at Fort Hood, Texas. He earned a sharpshooter badge with the M1 rifle, but fate spared him the front lines. Thanks to his quick typing skills, he was shuffled into a desk job in Maryland, far from the chaos overseas. Hefner called it a lucky break. Instead of storming beaches, he was drawing cartoons for military newsletters and chasing women in Washington nightlife. That twist of fortune gave him time to refine what mattered most, his imagination. He later admitted that if combat had swallowed those years, Playboy might never have happened. Instead, the war left him restless, hungry for more than just survival. When the Army discharged him in 1946, Hefner went straight to the University of Illinois. He majored in psychology with minors in creative writing and art, compressing 4 years into just 2.5. On campus, he became editor of the humor magazine Shaft, and it was here that the seeds of Playboy first appeared. Hefner added a controversial feature called Co-Ed of the Month, an early blueprint for the spreads that would later make him famous. In 1940, he briefly enrolled at Northwestern for graduate work in sociology, but his rebellious streak couldn't be contained. After writing a paper criticizing America's sex laws, he walked away. Rules didn't inspire him. Breaking them did. The boy from a strict, loveless home was now preparing to challenge an entire culture. By 1952, Hefner had finally landed a steady job as a copywriter at Esquire magazine. The pay was meager, just $60 a week, but it felt like a step into the world he wanted. Then came the moment that defined him. He asked for a $5 raise. The editors refused. Most people would have swallowed their pride, but Hefner walked out. It was a small act of defiance that would ignite an empire. That same year, he began raising money for his own magazine. He mortgaged his furniture for $600, convinced 45 investors to chip in, and even persuaded his mother, a devout woman who hated the idea, to give him $1,000 because she believed in her son. By December 19, Hefner was working out of his cramped Chicago kitchen on a publication he first wanted to call Stag Party. A threatened lawsuit forced him to change it. He chose Playboy. The first issue didn't even carry a date. Hefner wasn't sure there would be a second, but it had a secret weapon: nude photos of Marilyn Monroe. Taken years earlier for a calendar, Hefner bought the rights for $500. He had never met her, but he knew she was on the edge of superstardom. When the magazine hit stands in December, it sold 54,000 copies at 50 cents each. The image of Monroe stretched across red velvet, eyes closed, lips parted, became immortal. Yet Hefner's plan wasn't just about photographs. That very first issue also carried jazz articles, sports columns, and even a Sherlock Holmes reprint. From the start, Hefner wanted his magazine to be more than skin. He wanted it to be culture, rebellion, and sophistication rolled into one. By the late 1950s, Playboy was no longer just a magazine. It was an identity. Hefner wanted to turn his lifestyle into a brand, and he found the perfect stage in television. In 1950, he launched Playboy's Penthouse, a variety show disguised as a party in his apartment. Celebrities mingled with musicians like Ella Fitzgerald and Sammy Davis Jr., while Hefner played the role of host in his signature tuxedo. It looked glamorous, but what really made headlines was who was allowed in. Black and white performers appeared together, clinking glasses on screen, at a time when some southern stations still refused to air the show. In 1960, Hefner doubled down on that image by opening the first Playboy Club in Chicago. Men lined up for keyholder memberships, eager for a glimpse of the satin corsets, cuffs, and bunny ears worn by the servers. Behind the scenes, though, the job came with strict rules. Weight limits, appearance checks, and curfews turned the fantasy into grueling reality for the women wearing the ears. Still, the clubs were an instant hit. Within a year, over 132,000 members had poured through the doors. Eventually, there would be 40 clubs across the globe, from London to Jamaica. At the same time, Hefner used his magazine to push social debates. Between 1962 and 1965, he wrote a 250,000-word series called The Playboy Philosophy. He tackled everything from free speech to abortion rights, positioning himself as a champion of liberation. Some readers saw him as a visionary. Others, especially feminist groups, saw only exploitation wrapped in clever rhetoric. Protests grew louder. What Hefner called philosophy, they called justification. For Hefner, though, controversy wasn't a burden. It was proof he had society's attention, and he had no plans to let go. Long before the mansion, before the silk robes and armies of girlfriends, Hefner believed in monogamy. In 1949, he married his college sweetheart, Mildred "Millie" Williams. She was the woman he had saved himself for, the one he thought would anchor his restless imagination. But while he was away in the army, Millie confessed to having an affair. Hefner later described it as the most painful moment of his life, one that shattered his faith in traditional marriage. Out of guilt, Millie agreed to let him see other women, a decision that set the tone for the decades that followed. Their marriage ended in 1959, leaving behind 2 children, Christy and David. From that point forward, Hefner leaned fully into the persona he was building in his magazine. He surrounded himself with models and young girlfriends, openly dating several at a time. In the late 1960s, he met Barbie Benton, an 18-year-old who became both his muse and partner. She convinced him to buy the Holmby Hills estate in 1971, the Playboy mansion that would define his empire. Their relationship lasted until 1976, and despite his infidelity, Benton later admitted those were the best years of her life. In 1989, Hefner surprised the public by marrying again, this time to playmate Kimberly Conrad, who was 36 years younger. They had 2 sons, Marston and Cooper, but by the late 1990s, the marriage had fractured. Decades later, in 2012, Hefner wed one last time to Crystal Harris, who was 60 years his junior. Crystal would later reveal that life inside the mansion was tightly controlled, down to her nail polish and curfew. The public saw a charming playboy. Behind closed doors, his wives and girlfriends described rules, control, and a man who treated love less like a partnership and more like a contract. As Playboy's empire grew, so did the shadows around it. In 1975, tragedy struck when Bobby Arnstein, Hefner's longtime secretary, died by suicide at just 34. She had been facing a 15-year prison sentence for drug charges tied to the Playboy network, and Hefner claimed the case was a government witch hunt. To the public, it looked like the glamorous lifestyle had a darker cost. That perception only deepened in 1980 with the brutal murder of Dorothy Stratton, the 20-year-old Playmate of the Year. Stratton's jealous husband killed her after months of controlling behavior, and critics accused Hefner of pushing her into an industry that left her vulnerable. Her death sparked lawsuits, books, and films that portrayed Playboy less as a dream and more as a dangerous trap. Rumors of heavy drug use swirled through the 1970s and 1980s. Cocaine, quaaludes, and alcohol blurred the line between partying and exploitation. Former insiders spoke of overdoses, assaults, and women too young to be in those rooms. The brand was still selling millions of magazines, but the facade of liberation was cracking. What the public saw as champagne-soaked glamour was, to many women inside the mansion, something far closer to captivity. By the 1970s, the Playboy Mansion had become more than a party house. It was a fortress of secrets. Beneath the Gothic-style home stretched hidden tunnels and rooms that only staff and insiders knew about. Some connected the main mansion to the game house and bathhouse, letting staff and guests move unseen. Others whispered that tunnels led to the homes of Hollywood stars, though blueprints later showed they were sealed in the 1980s. The most infamous space was the Grotto, a cave-like pool and hot tub area where parties blurred into chaos. To outsiders, it was a symbol of indulgence. To many who lived it, it was a stage for things far darker: drugs, pressure, and cameras that never seemed to stop watching. In 1978, Hefner added an underground gym with saunas and tanning beds. Staff later revealed that hidden cameras were installed there too, capturing women without their knowledge. Former employees recalled pig nights, where sex workers were brought in, filmed, and mocked as Hefner watched on large screens with a cigar in hand. The mansion was marketed as a fantasy land, but for many who walked those halls, it was a maze of control, disguised as luxury. Beneath the mansion's polished surface sat the most guarded secret of all: the vaults. Hidden behind stone walls and locked doors, they contained thousands of tapes, photos, and files stretching back decades. Former girlfriends and staff claimed cameras were hidden in bedrooms, gyms, even hallways, feeding into reels stored underground. To the outside world, they were Hefner's souvenirs. To those who lived it, they were evidence. By the 1980s, whispers spread that these recordings weren't just trophies, they were leverage. Celebrities, politicians, and playmates all feared what Hefner might have on them. Some former staff even suggested the tapes acted as insurance, ensuring no one crossed it. Lawsuits decades later alleged women discovered they had been filmed without consent, fueling accusations of blackmail and exploitation. The vaults didn't stop at videos. FBI files were reportedly kept there, documenting years of government investigations into obscenity laws and surveillance of Playboy's rise. Even after Hefner's death in 2017, lawsuits surfaced pointing directly to the basement, claiming it held more than memories. What the world thought was just a party archive may have been something much darker, a catalog of control that outlived the man himself. By the mid-1980s, the empire that once dazzled millions was beginning to crack. Playboy's casinos in Atlantic City and abroad collapsed under financial and licensing troubles. Magazine sales, once at a staggering 7 million copies per issue, started sinking as competition and cultural shifts pulled readers elsewhere. Hefner himself was slowing down. In 1985, at 59, he suffered a stroke that left him temporarily paralyzed. He sold his private jet, the infamous Big Bunny, and briefly tried to live healthier. But the lifestyle never truly changed. With Viagra and new girlfriends, the mansion's parties kept rolling, even as the brand's power dwindled. In 1988, Hefner's daughter Christy took over as CEO, steering Playboy into the digital age. The website, launched in the 1990s, kept the company alive, but the magic of the print empire was gone. By the 2000s, Hefner's public image shifted again, when reality TV put him back on screen with The Girls Next Door. Millions tuned in, but former girlfriends later revealed the smiling scenes masked a world of strict rules and emotional control. Behind the satin curtains, the empire was no longer expanding. It was surviving. Hefner's kingdom was fading, and the cracks were too big to hide. On September 27, 2017, Hugh Hefner died at 91 from complications of an E. coli infection. His final years had been marked by frailty, whispered rumors of dementia, and a mansion that was crumbling as much as the empire it represented. When the mansion was sold in 2016 for $100 million, the deal allowed Hefner to stay there until his death, a strange arrangement that revealed just how fragile his grip on power had become. His burial was just as controversial as his life. Decades earlier, Hefner had purchased the crypt next to Marilyn Monroe, the woman whose stolen image had launched his empire. He never met her, but in death, he bound his legacy to hers, a decision many saw as one final act of possession. After his passing, documentaries and lawsuits reignited the darkest stories: hidden cameras, tapes in vaults, women manipulated or drugged, and a culture that masked exploitation as glamour. For some, Hefner was a pioneer of free speech. For others, he was a man who built an empire on control and silence. The truth may always live in the basement. If you want more deep dives into the hidden scandals of icons and empires, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.